Far from the busy towns and quiet woodlands, Pennsylvania conceals remnants of an ancient past that have challenged researchers for decades. Scattered across the landscape are enigmatic stone formations, puzzling rock carvings, and enduring tales of forgotten peoples and vanished cultures. Together, they form a collection of age-old mysteries rooted in Pennsylvania's past, mysteries that remain without any clear explanation.
The timeline shattered. In the summer of 1973, an archaeologist named James Adavasio was excavating near the small town of Avella when he found a rock overhang. The place was called Meadowcroft Rock Shelter, and as excavation progressed, stone tools began to emerge. But these were not ordinary tools. They were part of an unusually refined toolkit later referred to by archaeologists as the Miller Complex. The collection featured elegant willow leaf-shaped spear points known as Miller Lanskillet points. These points were thin, symmetrical, and expertly chipped. Additionally, ancient craftsmen produced long, razor-sharp prismatic blades resembling those of a modern utility knife. To create such blades, they began with a specially prepared block of stone, a polyhedral core that resembled a geometric sculpture. By striking it with precision, a craftsman could detach a long, flawless blade. Such technology reflected advanced planning and significant skill. Therefore, finding these tools in the deepest and oldest layers served as the first strong indication that Meadowcroft preserved something extraordinarily ancient. After that, the discovery that would transform the debate arrived. The tiny stone flake, along with burned plant remains and charcoal from ancient hearths, was sent for radiocarbon analysis. The method measures the gradual decay of a radioactive form of carbon present in all living organisms. Once a living thing dies, its carbon decays at a steady rate, allowing scientists to estimate how long ago the organism died. However, the results from the deepest Meadowcroft strata were what actually changed everything. The tests returned dates ranging from 16,000 to 19,000 years before the present. This was not merely older than expected, it was a dramatic and unprecedented leap backwards in time. To understand the shock, it is important to recall what archaeologists accepted at the time. For most of the 20th century, the Clovis first paradigm had been treated as an unquestionable fact. According to this, the first people to enter the Americas were big game hunters whose distinctive spear points were first identified near the town of Clovis in New Mexico. It had long been believed that these people crossed a land bridge from Siberia into Alaska near the end of the last ice age, during a period when sea levels were low because much of the world's water was locked in gigantic glaciers. Scholars used to maintain that an ice-free corridor opened between two immense ice sheets roughly 13,500 years ago, and the Clovis people moved swiftly southward through this corridor, spreading rapidly across the continent. Their fluted spear points, identifiable by the long groove designed to help the point onto a shaft, were consistently dated to about 13,000 years ago. Very few archaeologists dared to contradict this theory.
So when the dates from Meadowcroft rock shift emerged, they raised dust in the archaeology community. For decades, many respected archaeologists voiced deep skepticism and mounted a series of objections. Their strongest concern involved contamination. Meadowcroft rock shift stood within a region containing ancient coal seams, and it was argued that groundwater flowing through these coal beds might have carried older carbon into the samples. Since coal is made from plant material millions of years old, any ancient carbon infiltrating the charcoal samples would make them appear far older than they truly were. It would be similar to dust from a prehistoric bone settling onto a modern bone before testing. Critics also questioned whether material from upper, younger layers might have drifted downward over time, thereby disrupting the site's integrity. Because rewriting human history carried enormous consequences, the scientific community demanded unmistakable proof. However, Adavasio and his team presented a firm defense grounded in their methods. From the first day of excavation, they worked with exceptional precision. Instead of relying solely on shovels, they used dental tools and artists' brushes, and every bit of soil was sifted through fine screens. By performing impeccable stratigraphy, the team demonstrated that the layers remained intact and unmixed, undisturbed by animals or water movement. Also, a hard cemented layer of fallen sandstone fragments sealed the ancient strata, proving that nothing had migrated downward from above. In response to the contamination concern, the team turned to a newer and far more sensitive technology known as accelerator mass spectrometry. This method required only a tiny sample and could date individual seeds or single pieces of charcoal. Importantly, it allowed samples to be chemically cleaned to remove unwanted carbon. when accelerator mass spectrometry was applied to Meadowcroft rock-shift materials, including a deer bone knife and fragile basketry fragments, it upheld the original extraordinary dates. This reinforced the team's argument and Adavasio's standards, and Meadowcroft rock-shift later became the model for modern excavation practices at sensitive archaeological sites. As time passed and additional ancient sites were uncovered across the Americas, the once solid Clovis First barrier began to weaken. But even with this evidence, an unresolved mystery remained. If people were living at Meadowcroft rock-shift 19,000 years ago, they were not the Clovis population who arrived thousands of years later. They represented an earlier and entirely different group of pioneers. Who were they, and where have they gone?
The first Paleo-Indians. 40 years before James Adavasio carried out his work at Meadowcroft, another archaeologist was facing a separate mystery. His name was John Widowhoff, and he spent his days carefully cataloging a collection of striking stone points recovered from a farm field near Shoup in central Pennsylvania. The points weren't the issue, they looked like the classic Clovis-style point. The mystery was in the stone itself. Geologists confirmed that the stone was not from Pennsylvania. Instead, it originated in the Hudson Valley of New York, more than 200 miles away. And so the question arose, how did stone from New York become a spear point left behind in central Pennsylvania? And what did this reveal about the people who transported it? The Paleo-Indians lived during the Pleistocene, the final phase of the Great Ice Age. Their world looked nothing like the Pennsylvania of today. Instead, the landscape resembled what one might associate with modern Alaska or northern Canada. The climate was significantly colder and much drier. Vast spruce and pine forests dominated the terrain, and herds of enormous, now extinct animals roamed freely. These included the woolly mammoth, an immense elephant-like creature with curved tusks and thick fur, and the mastodon, another elephant relative that preferred wooded environments. The Paleo-Indians lived as hunter-gatherers, moving across the land to follow the great herds while establishing temporary camps where kills could be processed and other resources collected. Their most iconic tool was the fluted point, similar to those discovered at Shoup, and likely fixed to a spear for hunting the massive animals of their era. The Shoup location itself lacked hearths or bones, so it was not a residential camp. Instead, it functioned as an archaeological site, a kill site, or a lithic workshop, a place where hunters paused to repair weapons or prepare for an ambush. The sheer concentration of points and tool fragments there, more than 18,000 pieces, suggests repeated use across generations. But for the people at Shoup to possess tools made from this Onondaga material, one of two scenarios must have occurred. Either the group responsible traveled an extraordinary distance of more than 200 miles from the stone source to central Pennsylvania, or the stone moved through a network in which groups traded or passed it along across the landscape. Either possibility is remarkable. It demonstrates that these early people knew an immense region in great detail. They understood where the highest quality stone could be found, even if reaching it required weeks of travel. As the Ice Age drew to a close, dramatic environmental changes reshaped the land. The massive glaciers retreated northward, and the climate grew noticeably warmer and wetter. This ecological shift compelled human groups to adapt their way of life. The new era, known as the Archaic period, was defined by continuous adjustment rather than sudden transformation. People did not abruptly settle or begin farming. Instead, they learned to thrive in their warmer world by developing many new ways to use the land. This gradual but skillful adjustment is evident in places such as Sheep Rock Shelter in central Pennsylvania. Sheep Rock is a deep, layered rock shelter, much like Meadowcroft, and contains a vertical sequence of occupations stacked across thousands of years. Archaeologists working there could observe the entire archaic story unfolding, stratum by stratum. In the oldest layers, the tools remained geared toward hunting, although the targeted animals changed. The large, fluted points used for pursuing the giant Ice Age creatures disappeared. Replacing them were smaller, carefully made points designed to be thrown with an atlatl, a spear-throwing device. The atlatl, a simple wooden lever, extended the hunter's arm, enabling greater force and accuracy. It was ideal for hunting white-tailed deer, wild turkey, and other smaller animals that dominated the post-Ice Age forests. Rather than traveling hundreds of miles as the Paleo-Indians once had, archaic groups focused on a seasonal cycle within a defined region. They came to know their territories intimately. In spring, they fished in river valleys and gathered early greens. Summer involved moving into higher areas to collect berries and hunt, and autumn required harvesting nuts and pursuing well-fed deer.
In the winter, they found shelter in protected places such as sheetrock, where stored supplies sustained families. Over time, these patterns formed the foundation for later Native American societies in Pennsylvania. For nearly 7,000 years, this steady rhythm of intelligent and adaptable hunting and gathering continued. And as populations slowly grew and knowledge deepened, new ideas would emerge, leaving a different kind of mark on the land.
The mound builders. In the year 1896, the city of Pittsburgh was expanding rapidly. Workers dug into the ground at McKee's and uncovered a deliberately engineered structure. It was a vast and carefully constructed burial mound, and within it were the remains of more than 30 individuals, accompanied by elegant and rare artifacts made from materials unfamiliar to Western Pennsylvania. This mound had been built as a sacred, intentionally designed monument by people associated with the Adena and Hopewell cultures. These cultures flourished from roughly 500 years before the birth of Christ to 500 years after the birth of Christ, across a vast region centered on the Ohio River Valley. They became widely known as the mound builders. Unlike the earlier archaic hunter-gatherers, these societies displayed early forms of social complexity. They constructed monumental earthworks, including large geometric enclosures, towering hilltop mounds, and conical burial mounds, such as the one exposed at McKee's Rocks. The real story of McKee's Rocks is revealed by the objects placed inside it. The artifacts were not local tools or everyday items. Instead, they were luxury pieces originating from distant lands. Some objects were made from copper that had come from the Great Lakes region, hundreds of miles to the north. Others included beads and gorgets crafted from shells that came from the Gulf of Mexico, more than 1,000 miles to the south. There were also sparkling sheets of mica, a mineral mined in the Appalachian Mountains of what is now the Carolinas. These items were not exchanged for daily survival. They held ceremonial importance and were placed with the dead to signify spiritual influence, social identity, and distant connections. This collection of rare materials showed an immense ceremonial network that stretched across the continent and extended into Pennsylvania. Scholars refer to this network as the Hopewell Interaction Sphere. It functioned not as a single empire, but as a widespread system of exchange and shared religious traditions that connected different communities throughout eastern North America. A community in Pennsylvania might contribute prized goods, such as finely worked flint or valuable animal pelts, into this network. And over time, these items would move across many hands and travel incredible distances. In return, communities received symbolic items, such as copper ear ornaments, shell vessels, or intricately cut mica shapes. Possessing such objects demonstrated participation in a powerful spiritual and social system. But after the Hopewell era ended, around 500 years after the birth of Christ, the extensive exchange network gradually faded. For several centuries afterwards, life in Pennsylvania became more localized. Nevertheless, change was underway as communities slowly began adopting a transformative technology, agriculture. It was this transition that created the conditions for the rise of the Clemson Island culture, which thrived in the Susquehanna River Valley from approximately 950 to 1250 years after the birth of Christ. They were the immediate forerunners of the more elaborate cultures that would appear later. The Clemson Island people lived in a manner quite distinct from the earlier mound builders. Instead of constructing huge ceremonial complexes, they lived in scattered homesteads. A typical settlement consisted of a small grouping of 1 or 2 family houses along a stream or river terrace, rather than a large permanent village. Their homes were oval or rectangular wigwams built with sapling frameworks and covered with bark or hides. They had not yet transitioned into full-time farming, but they had begun cultivating the land. Although they did not raise vast earthworks, the Clemson Island people still left enduring traces on the landscape. They built small, low burial mounds on terraces above the river to honor their dead. Clemson Island pottery was thick and sturdy, decorated with impressions from cord-wrapped sticks pressed into the clay before firing. The Clemson Island culture marked an essential transitional phase. Because they adopted agriculture early, they were more settled than the ancient archaic hunters. Yet they remained less centralized and less socially complex than the Hopewell mound builders who came before them. They lived in loosely scattered homesteads throughout the fertile river valleys, firmly connected to their family plots and local resources. Through their gradual, steady success in combining farming with foraging, they created a stable, growing population. This stability prepared the conditions for a significant change in social organization.
But what happens when a truly unique people rise, only for them to vanish, leaving archaeologists in the dark?
The vanished civilization. Around the year 1580, more than 1 century before European settlers would build permanent homes in the region, the river valleys of southwestern Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and eastern Ohio were covered with communities representing the height of ancient society in this part of North America. These are the people known today as the Monongahela culture. They are not the scattered homesteaders of the earlier Clemson Island tradition. Instead, they are something entirely different, a dense, organized, and flourishing civilization that built a distinctive way of life in these rolling hills. Yet, within a single human lifetime, by roughly 1635, every one of their villages would stand abandoned. Their disappearance was so complete that their history almost slipped entirely from memory, creating one of the great archaeological enigmas of the continent. The most striking feature of the Monongahela people was their village design. They lived in iconic circular settlements, and at the center of each village was a vast open plaza that functioned much like a shared communal yard. Around this plaza, arranged in a careful ring, stood dozens of small single-family homes. Each dwelling was a circular wigwam-style house, just large enough for one household. Surrounding the entire village rose a tall, strong stockade wall built from logs set upright into a deep trench. This was more than a simple boundary. Instead, it was a significant fortification. Moreover, entry into these villages was often controlled through maze-gated passages. The entrance was not a simple opening, it was a narrow, zigzagging corridor built inside the wall. Anyone attempting to enter was forced to follow a twisting route, slowing progress and leaving intruders exposed to defenders. This arrangement reveals that the threat of attack was a constant, shaping both daily life and settlement planning. Archaeologists learned about their daily life through the material culture preserved in the soil. They created distinctive pottery strengthened with crushed freshwater mussel shells mixed into the clay. Their tools reveal the rhythm of their work: stone hoes for tending fields, grinding stones for turning corn into meal, and bone needles for sewing hides into clothing. Then the cultural trajectory changed abruptly. By 1635, they were entirely gone, and every settlement had been deserted. Archaeologists frequently find houses with tools and pottery still resting on the floors as though the inhabitants intended to return, storage pits containing preserved corn kernels, and village features left undisturbed. The impression is not one of an orderly departure. Instead, it suggests that people left suddenly or were prevented from returning. However, researchers have developed several primary explanations for this dramatic disappearance. One leading explanation is warfare. During the late 15th century, the Seneca Nation of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy in present-day New York was expanding its influence. The Seneca were formidable warriors, seeking control of the expanding fur trade. Historical accounts from later decades describe Seneca campaigns across the Ohio Valley. It is entirely plausible that they launched violent assaults on Monongahela settlements. The universally fortified stockade walls reinforced the notion that the Monongahela lived under constant danger. Sustained conflict with such a powerful foe could have devastated their population, resulting in massacres, captives, and the rapid flight of survivors. Another explanation considers epidemics. For many decades before the year 1600, European fishermen, sailors, and explorers visited the eastern coasts of North America. They unknowingly carried diseases such as smallpox, measles, and influenza. Indigenous peoples had no natural immunity to these infections. These illnesses traveled along trade networks, often moving far inland well before any direct contact with Europeans occurred. A single epidemic could have killed a large portion of the Monongahela population in a matter of weeks or months.